Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining the Safe and Affordable Fund for Equity and Resilience program, also known as SAFER. The SAFER's webinar series afternoon session on domestic well and state small systems identifying at risk for the at-risk session. Sorry. This meeting will be held virtually and is being recorded and webcast. We just want to start off by honoring all of the groups who've experienced economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization. It's their stories and impacts for which we do this work. We recognize that we're meeting during a really challenging time and the impact that the global pandemic has had on all of us, especially on marginalized communities and their drinking water. Our work here today supports Indigenous and community voices so that we can all work together to provide clean, safe, affordable water for all Californians. Again, I just want to thank each of you for finding a way to join us virtually. As you know, we've moved to 100% virtual meeting space in just a few months. And we really thank you for your patience and understanding as we move through some of the technical difficulties for the meeting. We don't anticipate any, but if we do, we really appreciate your patience in advance if any do arise. We're doing our best to make sure that you can participate in these meetings in an effective and meaningful way, and that the time that you spend with us is valuable. Here are some guidelines for our meeting. So if you're joining by Zoom and you're on the line and you only want to listen in and you don't feel like you want to talk or comment, then we ask you to please join the webcast. Participating in the webcast can help us increase our platform's capacity and could prevent any technical delays. However, we do encourage you to join on the Zoom call for the discussion. If you would like to submit a question or ask a question or submit a comment for any of the discussion topics today, we ask that you fill out a comment and question form at the link provided. It's bit.ly, that's bit.ly/@risk2-PM. You can go there and fill that out, and we do have staff behind the scenes getting those to us. And then once we get to that section of the discussion, we will call your name or the last 3 digits of your phone number so that you can come on and speak. If we get a lot of questions that are similar in nature, we'll go ahead and address those, but we will give the opportunity for folks that ask them individually to follow up. And if you have any other technical difficulties or you're not able to fill out the form to submit a question or a comment, please email us at safer@waterboards.ca.gov and we can make sure that we can get you in the queue there. I also want to let you know that as we go through the meeting, there will be opportunities to respond and ask further questions. And you can do so by raising your hand if you're joining through the web, or if you're joining on the phone, you can press *9 and that'll raise your hand. We'll know you want to talk and then we can get to you so we can unmute you. With that, I just want to thank you all again for joining us and thanking all the State Water Board team members for all the work that they've put into these webinars and working behind the scenes to make sure that these meetings are successful. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Scott, and he will be your host for today. Him and Emily will take it away.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my name is Scott Seifried. I'm trusting you can hear me loud and clear. In fact, I'm told when I'm very nervous, like I am now, I tend to start shouting, so you might need to adjust the volume there on your end. But I am the chief of the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment Unit at the Division of Water Quality at the State Water Boards. And our unit and division is taking the lead on this particular Aquifer Risk Map effort. I want to spend probably 10 to 15 minutes introducing this afternoon's workshop, answering some questions from the last workshop, sort of setting the stage, and then you'll be glad to know I'll turn it over to Emily Houlihan, who is a staff member with the Gamma unit, who's the lead staff putting this risk map together and handling the technical issues that we want to introduce and walk you through today. And also we have behind the scenes the chief of the groundwater monitoring section at Division of Water Quality, John Borkovich. He's behind the scenes. He may be answering questions. He's going to be receiving questions and handling them as they need to be handled. So the slide in front of you now is sort of the overview of our schedule. We had a webinar in April. Today's July 22nd. We want to continue the process of our goals really are just to share with you our thought process and where we are, and then solicit any input we can get from you, either like Amanda mentioned in comments or raising hands today, or if you like me, you probably think of your input 2 days after the webinar, in which case you can, we would welcome emails, phone calls. We're in a position where we're wide open. You know, we have been working on this for quite a while, as you'll see. We're most interested in, you know, any blind spots that we might be exposing here that we don't know about. The earlier we know about them, the better. But you can see the schedule here. We are, to comply with SB 200, sort of under the gun or tasked with publishing this risk map January 1st, 2021. And working backwards from there, you know, we anticipate or would like to send out a draft map for review in the October timeframe to allow time for comment. But at that point, some of these assumptions that we're going to be talking about will be a bit baked in. So we are asking for input now, and I kind of realize it's challenging to provide input for some of the things we're asking without being able to see the implications of what we're talking about. But we're doing our best in getting it out there. And I just also want to say that the bottom right corner of this slide, this map is updated annually. And it's going to be an evergreen, sort of a continuous improvement situation as new data comes in, new methods of locating domestic wells. And we'll also learn more, you know, as a team, how this map will be integrated and used in the fund expenditure plan specifically, and that will inform for the next generation of the map. So it's important we get this map as right as we can this first round, but I also, you know, this is an ongoing process and we're committed to continuous improvement on it. Emily, could you, what's the next slide? So we have a start with the poll question, really simple. Did you participate in the initial workshop, April 17th, 2020? Yes or no? Well, that's helpful information. So we will be covering, you know, the basics pretty quickly in the next few minutes. If you didn't participate in the first one, hopefully painting a picture of what this risk map is and where it fits into the bigger picture. But please feel free to ask any clarifying questions about that. So I think we can move. I think we can move on to the next slide. 70-30. 70 no, 30 yes. Participating in the previous workshop. So we'll do a little Aquifer Risk Map 101. We're responding to some specific requirements in SB 200. I want to spend some time on this and more importantly, where this risk map fits in with the rest of the process. But where we're really targeting efforts is on this language, producing a map of aquifers that are at risk of containing contaminants that exceed safe drinking water standards and that are used as a source of drinking water for state small systems or a domestic well. And then the other important language there, update the map annually. And then the next key requirement, fairly straightforward, is that it is by January 1st, 2021. And that the map is, you know, and this is a commitment to transparency, publicly accessible on the internet website. And so we intend to meet that goal and get that map up by January 1st, 2021. So our goals here are they're quite focused on evaluation of groundwater quality. And it's in contrast to the session this morning, because domestic wells are either not regulated at all or state small systems sparingly regulated by the county, we do not have a data set of water quality data for these wells. And therefore the approach is, and the reason why the Division of Water Quality and the groundwater group is involved, is that the approach is to estimate the groundwater quality in an area and then overlay the locations of domestic wells and state smalls as a means to estimate what might be in those wells. And so this is why all our focus is on estimation of groundwater quality. I know there's questions about interacting with other agencies and efforts about other risk factors that are equally or more important, like drought risk and such. We'll talk about how we're going to integrate with that. But again, our focus, when we say risk, we mean actually probability of the groundwater having constituents of concern above regulatory levels. And it's a little different definition than risk used like this morning or in a more general context. So the second bullet there, we focus on the shallower groundwater. And then the last bullet, how we intend to combine this isolated water quality risk factor with other risk factors. So this, you'll hear this theme repeated from me, at least in the beginning here a little bit, how the FAQs from the last workshop in a nutshell. We had a couple of questions very pointed about domestic well, how are they being located? And this, frankly, we are recognizing up front is quite a big data gap in our state. What we are doing right now is heavily relying on the existing domestic well database at the Department of Water Resources as our first start, and that's what we used for the needs assessment. However, we are always looking to team, and we're looking to get the best data set we can on that and get it into our system from other efforts. Most notably, USGS has been doing work locating domestic wells for their targeted assessments of shallow aquifer systems. And WES, a Water Equity Science Shop, also has been doing work there with OEHA grant work. And so we've been in communication with WES, comparing notes about our water quality assessments, but also sort of informally divvying work up potentially, where we focus more on the groundwater quality data because we sort of house and own and run that data. And WES addressing the bigger perhaps data gap, again, of specific locations for domestic wells. Another very understandable concern, how will owner privacy be maintained? And it's quite simple. We're used to this. We're used to obtaining data for domestic wells and putting a firewall between the data and the private information. It's not necessary. And in fact, to illustrate that, in our groundwater ambient monitoring assessment database, we don't even have fields for personal information. It's, XY location, hopefully some well construction information, and then dates and chemical results. So we can talk about that, and I think John Borkovich can address that programmatically if we need to drill into that more. And the last question there, I hopefully won't drone on and on, but I do want to highlight the work we've been doing to coordinate with these other efforts. DWR, most notably, the county CDAG, County Drought Advisory Group work that Julie Ekstrom led. We have been working with her on our infrequent communication with her. For example, our groundwater quality evaluation for shallow and deeper data we gave to her, and she integrated that into that drought risk tool. And we've been talking to her, kind of making sure that whatever format we come up with can communicate with that more holistic risk tool. And so that, and again, to reiterate, with CWC and WES, we've been in touch with our point person there is Claire Pace, who is the principal investigator with WES, working with OEHA and Carolina Balas on, we both did water quality assessments, so there's overlap there. But the value there is that we can compare the results, which we have done very quantitatively in our white paper, and it helps both efforts understand strengths and weaknesses of various approaches of water quality estimation. Finally, for CB salts, we're tracking, we downloaded and track all their nitrate estimation data, very detailed data. There's differences between our data sets. They're nitrate only, and we're trying to capture all chemicals, and they're obviously Central Valley focused, and we're statewide. But we're always taking that data and comparing it to our estimations and understanding the differences and similarities. So I hope that sort of paints a picture there. What we want to cover today in a great overview is, number one, domestic wells, what we're doing about that, how we can improve that. That's as important as our water quality estimation is where are the wells. Number two, and Emily's going to be covering these three questions. Number two, what should go into the risk? And again, in the context of strictly water quality risk, but within that world of water quality, what factors should be included and how might they be ranked? And then the third one is, how do we aggregate the data? How do we take point data from wells and represent areas like basins or sub-basins or census blocks or whichever? Those are our sort of fundamental questions that we're working through and we want to bring out during today's workshop. So we have another poll question, and it's similar to what was run this morning. Are these webinar workshops sufficient for public input to the Aquifer Risk Map? Sort of, again, a yes or no. And the next poll question, we're doing these concurrently. How familiar are you with the Gamma domestic well water quality tool? Sort of a dead heat for the first question there. So for the number one, for the folks answering no, we certainly appreciate that and are open to suggestion. And again, it's difficult to know the whole population, but we invite literally phone calls, emails, perhaps little ad hoc technical groups. We're open to that to the extent possible. And there's the answer for question two. 20% are very familiar, 40 somewhat, 14% never heard of it. All right. That's very helpful feedback for us, actually. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Emily, who's going to walk us through sort of the nitty-gritty of these questions that we introduced.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I'm just going to briefly cover some of the work that we've done previous to this and the work that's led up to where we are currently in developing the Aquifer Risk Map. So I apologize if you've heard this spiel from me before, but I'm just going to talk briefly about the domestic well water quality tool, which was developed in support of the needs assessment to identify domestic wells that might be at risk of water quality issues. So in a nutshell, the domestic well water quality tool uses depth-filtered water quality data from a variety of wells to estimate water quality for all chemicals with an MCL for square mile sections statewide. We used two metrics to estimate groundwater quality. The first was the long-term average, which was the average over the last 20 years. And the second metric was recent water quality, which encompassed all results from a well in the past 2 years. Our estimations were mainly distance-based. We basically took point locations and used them to extrapolate the water quality in nearby areas. To estimate where domestic wells were located, we used the Department of Water Resources online system for well completion reports to basically get an estimate of how many domestic wells there might be per square mile. We then overlaid these two layers, the water quality estimates and the domestic well estimates, to provide a tool that basically allows you to identify where high density of domestic wells might overlap with areas of poor water quality. And this tool is available on the GAMA website, so you can click around it. We've displayed water quality estimates for 5 or 6 chemicals, along with the domestic well estimates. And the link to the detailed methodology is also available on the online viewer in the form of a white paper. There's a lot more detail in the background here of how we chose the wells to input into this tool, and a lot more detail on how we averaged, basically. But I'm not going to cover that here. I'm just going to give the brief overview. So next, I'm going to transition to the draft map we created for the fund expenditure plan. And I'm going to start us off with just a quick poll question. Let me launch it here. So this question just asks, have you read the fund expenditure plan section that focuses on the Aquifer Risk Map? This is pages 31 through 34. Just going to give people a few more seconds to respond here. All right. So it looks like most people have not read it, 63%, and the rest are divided between those who read it carefully and those who have just seen it or skimmed it. So thank you, that's very useful. So now I'm going to cover the draft fund expenditure plan map. So if you haven't seen it, I'm going to explain how we created it and hopefully shed some light on how it might inform the final Aquifer Risk Map. So to create the map for the draft fund expenditure plan, we took the needs assessment data from the domestic well water quality tool, and we basically used it to classify sections as at risk or not at risk. And it's a little bit complicated, so I'm going to walk through this slowly, but again, feel free to submit a question about this. So the red sections on the map here are sections that are listed as at risk based on the domestic well water quality tool. And what that means is that that section had either an average water quality estimate above the MCL or a recent water quality result above the MCL for one or more chemicals. And again, we assessed all chemicals with an MCL plus hexavalent chromium. So that is 96 chemicals in total. So that's what you see here on the right. And then the other colors, the yellow, green, and blue, just represent different levels of the average water quality, but we determined that for this map, those would be considered not at risk. Again, this is still in draft, so if you have suggestions on what other criteria we might use to classify areas as at risk, we are very interested in hearing that. So from that map, what we did to create the draft fund expenditure plan map was we took groundwater units, which are basically basins and upland areas in the state, and we calculated what percentage of that groundwater unit was consisted of at-risk sections. So what percentage of the groundwater unit had red or at-risk sections? And we then ranked all of the groundwater units into percentiles with regard to how many at-risk sections they contained. So on this map, the darker colored areas contain a higher percentage of at-risk sections, and the lighter color areas contain less percentage of at-risk sections. And in addition, there are several areas for which we have insufficient or not enough data, and those are in gray. And I understand that it might be a little bit hard to view this map if you're looking at it for the first time, so I'm just going to leave it up for a second and note that I overlain the groundwater unit colors with county boundaries. I understand that groundwater units might not be familiar to everybody, and so hopefully by seeing the county outlines, you can situate where the potentially at-risk areas are and see if that aligns with your expectations of what areas might be at risk for water quality issues. So again, this was just the draft map that we put together for the fund expenditure plan. This does not represent the final aquifer risk map, but it does represent, one potential way that we can start to develop it. So before we jump into the discussion portion, I'm just going to outline a few of the key decisions that are going to go into the Aquifer Risk Map. And the discussion topics should cover the first 4 of these key decisions. So we're actually going to work backwards today. And our first discussion topic is going to be on the domestic wells and state small system identification. And then we're going to talk about the risk ranking. So what are the water quality risk factors? How can we establish thresholds for risk? And how should we weight or rank those risk factors? And the final discussion topic is going to cover the technical questions, which incorporate the geostatistics and data availability, which is basically how should we average these water quality results, and how should we deal with gaps in data or unknown areas. So again, these are the discussion topics that we're going to cover. And there's also sort of an informal 4th discussion topic where we'll just take general Q&A or any other questions or comments that don't exactly fit into these discussion bins. So again, as others have said, if you would like to participate, we invite you to submit a form at this link. And yeah, with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda, or I'm sorry. I'm first going to tee up the first discussion topic, and then I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Okay.
So just to catch people up to speed on the current state of identifying domestic well and state small system locations, there are a couple ways that this is being done currently out there. This is mostly for domestic wells. State small system identification is a little bit separate. But for identifying domestic wells, the main resource is probably the Department of Water Resources OSCAR tool, which identifies the concentration of domestic well records per square mile. And like Scott said earlier, at UC Berkeley, Claire Pace and the WES team have really refined this OSCAR data by overlaying it with APN data and census information to identify likely and possible domestic well communities. So this represents a bit of a refinement or improvement over the raw OSCAR data. And then in a separate effort, the USGS is working with census data and household density information to identify areas that have a high likelihood of domestic well usage. And that methodology is detailed in the Johnson et al. Paper in 2009, and also several other papers by Tyler Johnson. But basically it uses a variety of techniques to identify areas that are likely to have domestic wells. So before we get into the discussion, I just wanted to share this poll question. Let me launch it real fast. And this poll question is, should areas within public water system boundaries be excluded from this Aquifer Risk Map assessment, even though many domestic wells are located within these boundaries? I'll just give people a few more seconds to respond. All right, so it looks like the majority of people responded with no, we should include areas within public water system boundaries, although some people were not sure and a few said yes. So really thank you for these poll results. They really do help us get a sense of what your thoughts are. So thank you very much for responding. And now I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you, Emily. So now we just wanted to open it up. We don't have any questions that came through specifically for this discussion topic. We do have some that came through for general, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. But for now, we just wanted to leave it up to any of the participants that are on the call today. If you're joining by the by phone, you can press *9. So we know you'd like to speak or comment or ask a question on either of these questions. Or if you're here on the web with us, you can raise your hand. The questions that we're asking are, how can we improve the identification of domestic wells? How can we ensure that these methodologies are as complete as possible and identify all potential domestic wells? It looks like Tara would like to speak. So Tara, you should be unmuted now and you can go ahead and speak.
Great, thank you. So this is Tara Henry, and to, I guess, build on the first question, improving the identification of domestic wells, I think one gap that you won't be able to address immediately, but eventually would be great to address is if those wells are actually still active or if they've been destroyed or are no longer in use. I don't feel like that's been fully incorporated. And then to clarify my answer on your poll question, I said no, that we shouldn't exclude the wells within water system boundaries, mainly because the boundaries at this point are not as accurate as they could be. So oftentimes they're reflecting where the water system's allowed to serve, not where it actually serves. So that gives us like this gray area of water system boundaries, where if we exclude the wells there, then we're actually excluding wells that people probably really are using. So that I just wanted to clarify my answer in a way that really I couldn't clarify in the poll. So that's all I want to add there.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for that. Is there anyone that wants to respond to Tara?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Emily.
So I just want to say thank you very much for that comment. I know that it definitely is a key data gap. You know, even though there are records of domestic wells in the OSCR system, that tool does not identify whether they're actively being used. And that's definitely something I want to look into. I know that Rich Palou at UC Davis is working on some identification of active wells and median well use age. But yeah, definitely. And with regard to your second point, that is a very important point, and we will definitely note that.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that kind of data coming in, frankly, from the CV salts implementation in the next few years, with the early action plans that are really going out and, you know, surveying and knocking on doors and doing that kind of work. And that's the kind of work that needs to be done, it sounds like, to really get quality data around those issues.
All right, thank you. So next in queue is going to be Paul, and then we do have one question that came through on this topic on the forum, so I'll read that right after Paul. Paul, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Hi, Paul Peschel with Kings River Conservation District. I really had a general comment right now. I may have some later, and it's with regard to the polls. I was involved in this morning session, and be careful how you're using the polls, because I found that most of the questions were posed in such a way that it forced you into answers. It really didn't explain things fully, and the last person kind of explained the dilemma I had. So take your answers with a grain of salt, because I would have said it depends on the situation. That would have been my actual answer. That's my comment right now. I'll wait until we get through some more data to possibly provide some other.
All right, thanks, Paul. That's really good feedback. And so just to follow up with that, if anyone was on the call earlier this morning or any of the poll questions today don't give you the breadth of responses that you would like and you would like to share more, please use the opportunity within the discussions to expand just like Tara did, or you can email us clarifications or any other comments at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. And then we'll work on making sure that our poll questions are improved in the future. So thanks, Paul. I really appreciate that feedback. And then next, I'm going to read a comment from Miladi K. And they asked not to speak. So the question is, for your GIS-based well contamination assessment tool, it isn't clear from the attribute table or legend what a 1 stands for with regard to arsenic, nitrogen, or other chemical levels.
I'm going to take a moment, if there's a pause later, and maybe come back to this. I'm not immediately sure what that's referencing, but give me a couple minutes and I can figure it out.
Sure thing. Thank you. So is there anyone else that would like to comment or share anything with this discussion topic while Emily's looking through that? And if we can move on, and we can always address that question later, because we have another hour and a half together to discuss all this information, and it all kind of overlaps. Whoops, it seems like Cindy has a comment. So Cindy, you can go ahead and share.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about chromium-6. I think it was mentioned that there isn't a standard currently, but data was used for chromium-6. And was it assumed the number would be the same number that it was before? And to what extent does having the chrom-6 as part of this information drive the at-risk shading?
Yeah, that's a great question. While Emily's getting ready, I'll just say that we looked at both a 10 and a 20 microgram per liter comparison level, or potential future, maximum contaminant level. And I don't remember the results between 10 and 20 or where chrom-6 weighed in. Emily might have that on the tip of her brain. It did not rise to the level of the top 5, right?
That's correct. Just to give kind of people a brief overview of what chemicals are responsible for the most at-risk sections. That was dominantly nitrate, arsenic, trichloropropane, and then gross alpha, which is sort of general uranium radioactive stuff. So hexavalent chromium was not responsible for too many at-risk sections. And then I can tell you that, yeah, in referring to what Scott said, we did basically test different comparison values. So we tested 20, 10, and 5. And obviously, as you lower the comparison value, more sections are listed as at risk.
Thank you. Appreciate that answer.
Okay, Emily, were you able to find that section that Melody was referring to?
I think so. So there's two, sorry if this is going to get very confusing for people that aren't also looking at the domestic well water quality tool right now. So if she was so there's a couple layers on the water quality tool, but if she's referring to the grade in general, we basically assigned each section for each chemical a water quality grade, and 1 represents the lowest grade, which means that the section is the lowest risk. So 1 would mean that there were no recent values, no recent water quality results above the MCL, and the long-term water quality estimate was below half of the MCL. So a 1 represents a low risk, you could think of. The highest risk is 6. There's a couple other things she could be referencing. So if that is not your question, I'm very sorry, and we can get back to you on that.
Thanks, Emily. We had another question come through from Jennifer Clary, who was just asking, how does the depth play into the determination of at-risk domestic wells? Maybe we could be more multidimensional if we can in the answers.
Yeah, so if that question is referring to how we filtered the wells to determine, wells that are proxy for domestic well depths, I can speak on that briefly. So we wanted to focus on estimating water quality for domestic well depths, which in most places represents the shallower groundwater. However, we had to incorporate water quality results from a variety of wells because there just aren't enough water quality results from strictly domestic wells. And so what we did is we used the statistics from the Department of Water Resources well completion report system to identify basically average domestic well depths and places where domestic wells and public wells are accessing the same depths. And we used that to inform what wells we screened into our water quality tool to provide, point estimates of water quality.
Emily, this is John. Sorry to interrupt, but do you happen to have that slide in your presentation to show that comparison, or is that not in this slide deck?
That is not in this slide deck, although I believe it was in the slide deck for the April 17th webinar. So that is available online.
Right, but certainly the depth aspect of it is being considered.
It's being considered to filter out which data to consider, but I think the question is getting at, our explanation is two-dimensional, that we're only looking at water quality and not other risk factors related to depth. I mean, the shallower the well, the more vulnerable to potential water table lowering from drought. And that's where this water quality layer would need to be integrated with another layer, for example, the CDAG layer from DWR, to combine a risk of water quality issue with a risk of water level issue. But for us, and again, we are trying to focus on just the water quality aspect for this layer, knowing that it'll be integrated with other risk factors.
Maybe we could unmute Jennifer Cleary to clarify her question, if that's not too much trouble.
Jennifer is not.
Okay.
If she's online, I can't tell where she is. So if Jennifer, if you would like to clarify that further, just email us with or change your name if you're participating through the web, so we can see where you are. So let's go ahead and move on to the next next section. And if we need to, we can always come back and revisit some things that needed to be cleared up or expanded on in the general section of the last part of the meeting.
Thanks. All right, so now we're going to talk about risk ranking, which encompasses risk factors that we can use to identify areas that are at risk for poor water quality, and how we should rank and assess those risk factors. So I just wanted to start this off by presenting the draft fund expenditure plan map as an example of what an Aquifer Risk Map can do, or what this map does do and what it doesn't do. So the current draft fund expenditure plan map, it contains relative rankings, which means that areas are ranked relative to one another. So an area isn't considered, at risk, it's just higher risk than other areas. Also, it assesses risk just based on whether any chemical is above the MCL in a section. And what it does not do, like I just said previously, it does not establish absolute thresholds for at risk or not at risk. It also does not incorporate risk assessment based on multiple chemicals. So an area that has water quality estimates over the MCL for multiple chemicals is not, higher risk than an area that has water quality estimates over the MCL only for one chemical. Additionally, this risk assessment, it does not incorporate how high above the MCL the water quality estimates are. So an area that has water quality estimates 2, 3, or 4 times above the MCL is given the same, relative risk ranking as an area that has water quality estimates only a slight bit above the MCL. So I'm not trying to tear down this map too much, but I'm just trying to point out, what it currently does do and what it doesn't do. And hopefully this can give people ideas for what we could incorporate into the final version of the Aquifer Risk Map. So again, I just want to note that maybe the poll questions don't fully encompass everybody's response. So thank you for that, for pointing that out. I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll here to give people a chance to respond. And we have 2 back-to-back questions here. So the first is, does the fund expenditure plan map capture enough risk factors to accurately characterize aquifer water quality risk? And the potential answers are, yes, it is sufficient. No, but it would be sufficient if the other risk factors mentioned were added. And no, it is not sufficient. And again, if these predetermined answers don't incorporate your response, please submit the form to a question or raise your hand. We would really like to hear more nuance about these and capture everybody's thoughts. The second question here basically asks whether the areas currently identified as high or higher risk align with your expectations of areas in California that might have issues with water quality in areas accessed by state small systems and domestic wells. So I know it's a lot to take in with looking at the fund expenditure plan map and answering these questions. So I'm going to go ahead and give people a little bit more time to respond.
Yeah, and we'll be asking the same question with the draft map that we hope to get out to everyone in the October timeframe, and you'd have more opportunity to study that map and give us that kind of feedback. This is, you know, looking at the screen and just sort of eyeballing it.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna give about 10 more seconds for people to respond, and then I'm gonna wrap these polls up. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll. So it looks like for the first question, the majority of respondents answered no, but it would be sufficient if the other risk factors mentioned were added, with the next largest group saying no, it is not sufficient, and the minority saying yes, it is sufficient. And it looks like for number 2, the majority of respondents indicated that they weren't sure if those areas match their expectations, and then somewhat evenly split between yes and no for the rest. And I do want to acknowledge that it is hard to look at a map just on screen and, you know, assess that immediately. So definitely take the time you need to look at the map later, and feel free to email us with additional follow-up. All right, so now I'll turn it over to Amanda for this discussion topic.
Thanks, Emily. So our next discussion topic is around the risk ranking. The questions are, what are the shortcomings of the current methodology? How should we adapt the methodology to better represent water quality for all domestic wells and state small systems in California? And what additional risk factors should be used to characterize aquifer water quality risk? And we don't have any questions coming through the forms section. I do want to let folks know that if you did attempt to submit a question through our form link and it did not go through, to please try again. There was a slight technical difficulty for a few minutes, but it's back up now. So if there's anyone on the call that would like to answer or comment or discuss these questions, please raise your hand now or press *9 on your phone. Okay, looks like Paul was the first one to raise their hand. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Paul, and go ahead.
I guess what I'm just wanted to comment. I didn't even raise my hand during the poll question, but I did struggle with those poll questions because it was just mentioned that this is a draft plan. And until you're further along, it's really impossible to accurately respond to those questions. So when I look at these questions here, you really have to be farther along in the process to evaluate it. And until you have that data, it's very difficult. And if I respond to it a little bit more directly, in our area, about 40% of it, domestic beneficial use has been removed, but yet that whole area is designated as high risk. So it's been de-designated, but yet it's still indicated on there because it's in draft form. So that wouldn't meet my expectation, but my expectation also right now would be that you're not at that point yet. So I think in essence, the questions are jumping the gun. That's my feedback. Hello?
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. This is Scott. Could you clarify what you mean by de-designated and removed?
And I'm not sure I'm even using the right term, but for instance, the Tulare Lake Basin, that's been de-designated for certain beneficial uses such as domestic well water. So there really are no wells in that area, and the groundwater is of that quality. So that beneficial use isn't available, is my understanding, for that purpose.
But to be clear, this is John. It's a specific area of the Tulare Lake Basin. So it's not the entire sub-basin, it's just that area where the lake bed is.
And that's true. It's a good portion of it, I should clarify.
I guess I have a question for you. This is John. Were you at the first workshop?
I wasn't.
Okay, because in retrospect, looking at some of the poll questions, I think one thing that popped out at me was there's a large portion of people that weren't present at the first workshop. And I think that in retrospect, we might have wanted to maybe do a quick overview of how I would argue rigorous methodology that went into the development of the needs assessment map, and that kind of pivoting off of that. So we've sort of parachuted into this with the expectation that people had better knowledge of the where we had been up to this point. And so that's something that I'd like to address with you. Is there a way, now that we're here, it's kind of late, but is there something that we could provide to the participants out there who weren't able to be at the first workshop, in a way to where they could have a primer, if you will, on getting caught up to what we've done up to this point? Maybe like a fact sheet or some sort of information on the website to break down where and how what we've done up to this point.
Well, if I could, I would just have two comments. That one, just to reemphasize what you said, there was 70% of the people that weren't at the previous workshop. But yet the first question after they asked, would you want more of these? Well, 70% of the people really can't even answer that question. The more direct answer that I would have on your second question is, I'm not sure that I need more now. I realize you've had a rigorous effort that has gone into this, but until I personally see more results and data, that will help give me better feedback. For me, it's still at too of an early in the stage, but I may be speaking out of turn.
No, that's fine, and that's what we're looking for. But I can hook into the comment, and it's something we've been wrestling with. How do we incorporate domestic well population data that we do have? Should that be incorporated into our water quality risk? I mean, if nobody's there drinking it, it's not a risk. So how rigorously do we stick to this idea that we're just simply estimating water quality conditions and then overlaying domestic wells? If we include that area you mentioned, then that might get included as part of the top 20% when it shouldn't be.
That was actually one of the first questions that came to mind for me. You need to have a correlation between MCLs and true risk, because you can have risk from a theoretical standpoint, but if it isn't a risk to anybody, it isn't a risk. And so that is something that I'm interested in seeing what you were going to come up with. So that was actually one of the questions I was going to potentially pose later.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good discussion topic.
Thanks for the discussion around this, Paul, John, and Scott.
If I could just interject one other thing. So when you came up with your 5 criteria, because this was my point, are you sure that that's really what you want with that kind of a filter? And I'll end it with that.
Scott, do you want to comment on that last bit before we go on to the next topic?
I'm just taking in the question. I don't have a quick response. That's fine.
Okay, great, no problem. Well, we can continue that. We are noting all of the questions, so we can follow up with this in the next one. Thanks again for your questions and discussion, Paul. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next topic and section of the meeting. So Emily, I'll hand it back to you. Thanks, Amanda.
So the last discussion topic is sort of an umbrella topic about, technical aspects of the Aquifer Risk Map. On the screen here, I'm just showing an example on the left of areas where we had data gaps as part of the needs assessment. The areas in gray indicate areas where we did not have water quality results to inform our estimates. And then on the right and in the middle, I'm just showing some examples of several modeling studies that basically estimate various depths of water quality, either throughout the state or in the Central Valley. And this is mainly just to tee up. Oh, I'm sorry. My computer just did something very funny. I'm sorry, hopefully you all can see my screen again. Sorry about that.
It's still there.
Okay, great. Oops, okay. So, and then the other part of this technical question aspect is, so that was how should we, the previous slide covered, I'm sorry, the previous slide covered how we should deal with data gaps. And then this slide is sort of showing an example of how we might use different boundaries to aggregate our water quality estimates. And again, I realize that since this isn't finalized, it's kind of hard to say like yes or no, this is a good way of doing it, or you should think about this. But this is just an example I put together to show 4 different ways that you can aggregate point water quality data into various, various boundary layers. So on the left is showing the point wells with some sort of mock data. And then on the right are 4 examples of how you can aggregate that data to estimate quote unquote aquifer risk. And again, yeah. So on the top left is showing aggregate by census tract boundaries. On the top right is showing aggregation by county boundaries. On the bottom right is showing aggregation by groundwater units. And on the bottom left is showing aggregation by square mile sections. And what I really wanted to do with these examples is just show the pros and cons of using each. Again, we're still in the process of discussing, which boundary layer to use, or if we end up using multiple, which ones those are. But there are pros and cons to each, and hopefully these examples give you a sense of how using larger areas can dilute your data, but can also have pros, in terms of distributing funding or making it accessible for people that aren't familiar with groundwater units, for example, to see the results. So just gonna do one last poll question here. Hang on while I launch it. Sorry, my computer is having some issues. I'm not able to launch the, oh, sorry. I can launch the poll now. All right, hopefully everybody can see this poll question. So just a quick assessment of what people are thinking right now. The question is, what boundaries should be used for the Aquifer Risk Map? And I've listed 4 main categories. The first category is the most granular level available. This would represent things such as individual well points or square mile sections. The second category is by geologic area. That would include alluvial basins or groundwater units. The third option is social or political boundaries. This could include things such as groundwater sustainability agency boundaries, county boundaries, census blocks or tracts. And then there's a fourth category for other, which is things that maybe we haven't considered. And in that case, I would really love to hear what other suggestions people have for that one. So I'll give people a couple more seconds to finish answering this poll. All right, I'm going to wrap up this poll now. So it looks like there were answers in all of the bins, but the majority of respondents, 44%, suggested using the most granular level available, and then 30% suggested using geologic area boundaries, and then the rest were evenly split between social political boundaries or other. All right, thank you for that. So I'll turn it over to Amanda for this discussion topic.
Thanks, Emily. So the next topic that we have is around technical questions. And before I read the three that we have here, we just wanted to ask you, Emily, if you could reestablish the definition for risk before we get into this topic area.
Sure. Yeah, so with regard to this Aquifer Risk Map, we are really zeroing in on the likelihood that any area has shallow or domestic depth groundwater that is above the MCL for chemicals with an MCL. So that is the baseline for which we are framing risk for this particular map.
And just for further clarification, could you expand a little bit on how risk is used within this webinar versus the morning webinar?
Sure. So specifically for this map, and mostly it's a product of the kind of data we have available and the specifics from SB 200 around the Aquifer Risk Map, we're really just focused on the likelihood that any area has water quality above regulatory standards, so above an MCL. Whereas in the morning, I think what I got from watching that is that there's a lot more of a holistic perspective. So it's not just is a water system out of compliance. They're also looking at the managerial capacity. I'm going to get all these words wrong. Sorry, the financial capacity and a lot of other things. And just by virtue of how different domestic wells and state small systems are, we are not really able to include those sorts of factors into our assessment of risk. I would just want to mention briefly here, I know Scott mentioned this earlier, but in addition to this Aquifer Risk Map, I believe we're exploring the possibility of incorporating additional risk factors, such as financial status of households, so DAC status, and also drought risk and other potential risk factors that might affect domestic wells, and somehow incorporating them into a type of holistic risk assessment for this. That would be similar to the DWR, the CDAG tool that Scott mentioned earlier. But for right now, the Aquifer Risk Map, as it is just going to encompass water quality risk, and then with the potential to add other risk factors maybe later.
Great, thank you, Emily. That was really helpful. We wanted to clarify that technicality before we get into this technical part of the discussion. So the questions that we have, keeping the definition of risk in mind, are: should additional data sources like models or estimations be used to fill in the data gaps? And if so, how would you suggest that? And then what is the risk of areas with unknown water quality, no data from nearby wells or models or estimations? And finally, what boundaries should data be aggregated over? So we're going to open this up for discussion. So if folks would like to comment or provide ideas or any questions about this, please go ahead and raise your hand or press *9 on your phone, and we'll get you into the discussion.
And listening to some comments that have already come in, I just want to iterate that it is challenging to, we've been living these questions for months, and to, throw these out to an audience that didn't attend the first webinar and didn't read the fund expenditure plan and study our map, then we understand that it's, we're just casting a net out. The hope is that, like Emily mentioned, the draft risk map that got embedded into the fund expenditure plan is an example. It is a template. It's there. If you're interested in it, you can study it, look for warts, look for things you don't like, and then that might help answer some of these questions and pursue those. So these are the questions that we're asking ourselves and seeking input on, but we understand that they're loaded and they're kind of tough to weigh in on just off the cuff.
While folks are mulling that over and seeing if they have any ideas for these three questions, I do want to acknowledge that we just had a submission from Kristen Johnson, who's from Coachella Valley Water District. And she's mentioning that she and her affiliation did provide several maps to assist the data gathering phase on May 26th of this year, but they didn't receive follow-up from our team or an acknowledgement of receipt. And I just want to let folks know that, and to Kristen specifically, that we're looking into that now. We really try to monitor that safer email quite frequently. So if there is any time when we don't reply to you, please get back in touch with us. And I'm sorry to put the burden back on you, but if you don't hear from us within 24 hours, please just email us again to make sure it didn't get lost or go into some filtered folder, because we do make every attempt possible to respond to folks within a day or two maximum. So I do apologize to Kristen and Coachella Valley Water District for not responding to their shared resources. And we're going to follow up with you and anyone else that's on the call. Please know that we're an open line here. So we're really trying to make this building relationships and getting to know folks and improving this program as best as we can. So feel free to reach out to us in any way that you want to. If you don't hear from us or you're not satisfied, just email us again and we will get back to you. So with that, any other questions or comments on this discussion topic? Okay, great. Well, we'll go ahead and move on then. If folks think of anything, we can always share it at the end.
So now I think we'll open it up to a more general Q&A period. So any questions or comments that didn't neatly fit into the previous discussion topics are very welcome here.
And we do have quite a few here for the general section, and I'm going to read those off and trying to get folks on that wanted to speak and ask their question or share their comment. So we're going to start with, we are going to start with Stacy Taylor. If Stacy's still on the line, I'm going to unmute you now and you can share your comment and ask your question.
Hi, actually, I don't have any comment, just enjoying the presentation. So thank you very much.
Well, great, Stacy. That must have been left over from this morning. So thanks for coming back
Correct.
and joining us in the afternoon. So
Thank you.
thanks, Stacy. Next up, I'm going to ask for Martha from the Social Eco Education in LA. And we're going to unmute you, Martha, if you're still on the line. I don't see Martha's phone number here.
I am present.
Good. Oh,
Okay.
great. I'm glad somebody got to you. There you go, Martha. It's all yours.
Okay, so just for clarification, because I know there's, I'm not going to say an abundance of information about water wells out there, but in terms of Southern California, so my understanding is that there are 300 wells that are worse than Flint, Michigan. And when we're talking about these wells and maps of these wells and location, is it safe to say that if there was a tidbit where 60 of those 300 are located in Los Angeles and 30 of those wells are actually located in a region that I watch, which are 24 cities under the Central Basin? So if that is the case, just as people are monitoring for a variety of reasons, is there any way that we could actually have the information of that reference point? So the reference point, I heard there are 300 wells in California, 60 are in Los Angeles specifically, and of those 60, 30 are located within 24 cities in Southeast LA, which are the Central Basin. So I know that as people are looking to understand where our water comes from, and how do we become more water wise and understand the water concepts of what's happening. I got the tidbit that you're going to be putting this out in January 1 of 2021. But what about now? What do we have available? Can you post a link of where that information comes from, the 300 wells, 60 Los Angeles, 30 in the Central Basin? That was just something I read in an article, but as I tried to look for it, I could not find that. Like, where are those 30 wells?
Hi, this is John Borkovich, and thank you for your question. And I think I'd like to take a step back here, with respect to the effort that's being undertook on the development of the Aquifer Risk Map. That's one step in the process. This map, how it's going to be utilized, is another matter. So areas of the state that have issues, there are other people that are on this call that can speak more eloquently about this issue, but there's an advisory group that has been convened to look at these issues. And I think that the risk map is going to be utilized by this group to identify areas of the state that are at risk, that have needs. So the purpose of this map, we're not going to say, here's our risk map, and these are the areas of the state that get funding. It's not that simple. So there are many areas of the state that have contaminated groundwater in them, including the area that you've described, for various different chemicals across the state, depending upon what region you are. It could be nitrate in the Central Valley. It could be arsenic. As you get to the LA Basin area, you're going to have issues associated with perchlorate and other contaminants, chemicals used for the industrial uses in those areas. So I hope that's kind of addressing your question. There's a process in place, but this portion of the process isn't going to be dictating what areas of the state specifically are going to be receiving funding to either remediate wells or receive replacement water. That's several different steps where this, if you will, just think of this risk map as being information to help guide the decision makers in identifying areas that need assistance, either financial or otherwise.
Okay, so then can I add a little bit to the question? So then in reference to educating our community, so group 1 will be making a risk map that will offer information as the guide for decisions to be made. And then group 2, that would be these other individuals that are going to pick up the ball and hopefully run with it when it comes to areas. And so, as I mentioned, I just want to make sure I'm on the same page in regards to the wells. So specifically, I reside in Downey, California, and I am in the Central Basin District. And so, as we know, PFAS and PFO, PFOS and FAS are prevalent in these wells that I'm specifically talking about. And so if we're talking about gathering information for our map, and obviously those are not just the contaminants in the water, there are other contaminants. So this map will list all the contaminants, or just the contaminants that by law right now have to be listed.
So I'll take that one. This is Emily. So right now, we're only considering chemicals with an MCL that will inform the risk status of certain areas. So as I understand, PFASs are not currently have an MCL, so they would not be incorporated into this study.
But in the future, like was said at the outset, this map is going to be updated annually, and those risk factors will be reassessed over time. But I think Amanda was going to jump in here.
Yeah, thanks for taking that. And thank you, Martha, for bringing up this question and very important topic. We have captured all of the questions today. So Martha, I just want to share that there is part of your question that isn't specific to what we're covering in the content today, but might have, will help you get in touch with folks that might have more regional and specific answers and responses to what you're talking about there locally. And so just expect an email follow-up from us from the SAFER email so we can clarify exactly what you're asking and we can get you in touch with any information that we might have. And again, we really appreciate these questions because it just makes our program better. And we are working through the SAFER to educate and help people understand what the program is, but also what's happening with their water. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question, which is from Logan. And Logan asked not to speak for their comment to be read. And the question is, when companies are placed on the out of compliance or at risk list, are they? And once those systems are on the list, is there a general pathway to receive funding? If so, what does that process look like? And maybe here it looks like possibly that this might be from our DDW team. So
hey, Amanda, this is Kristen. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. I think this question is really getting at, the prioritization of who gets funding out of the fund expenditure plan. And I think, I don't think anyone from DSA is on our call today, but, DSA will be using the results of the risk assessment that we talked about this morning, and then the map that the Gamma folks are putting together to help with the prioritization of funds, but it doesn't determine a certain amount of level of funding that any individual will be eligible for or anything like that. But perhaps we could follow up with more detail in an email after we consult with DSA.
Great, thanks, Kristen, for that. Our next comment comes from Melody. And Melody has asked for us to read their comment, and it just says, thank you for taking my question. I want to ask whether the Water Board is tracking change in water scarcity or contamination in wells in rural communities with an increasing number of legal marijuana plantations. I live in a rural residential zone with 14 listed houses in Trinity County. And today there are 30 residences and all but 4 do not grow marijuana, which is a water-intensive crop. 12 residences have over 125 plants. We all operate on domestic wells, and 4 houses have had wells burn out in the last year.
Hi, this is John. So I thank you for the question. I think that this is more a matter of water quantity than quality. Obviously there's the Sigma group that's looking at water quantity issues, people over pumping in areas where there's increased activity for agricultural reasons in one crop or another. Is an issue across the state. So thank you for your question.
And then just wanted to follow up on that too, because there's a lot of overlap in some of these programs and jurisdictions and policies and everything. So that might be something too that you might want to look at Department of Water Resources. They might have some more information on that. And then I believe I can double check and see if we can follow up, but I think we have a website that is focused on the cannabis issue. So we'll see if we can provide some more resources to help you figure that out. The next question we have is coming from, let me go back here, sorry about that, is coming from Vijay. And the question is, How many total domestic wells are there? How much population are served by them? Are they all used for drinking water purposes? What are state small systems? How many state small systems are there and what are they used for? How is water quality measured? I'm not sure we can go through all of this. Some people dedicate their entire lives to answering these questions. They're really good ones, but let's see if we can take a stab at summarizing some of these key points here.
Sure, I'll go ahead and dive into my trivia brain. So according to the Department of Water Resources well completion records, there are approximately 350,000 domestic wells in California that serve between 1 and 2 million people.
And then the other part of that question was the state smalls, which that is rolling in now. We're getting more reliable estimates of that. Getting that data from individual counties and combining that into one data set, and that actually was included on the fund expenditure plan map. I can't think of the number of state smalls off the top of my head, but I think the county, working with the counties, they feel like they've captured roughly 80% of the state smalls that are out there, and something like 1,000 systems out there, and each system serving technically more than 4 connections, but sometimes, you know, in the order of, you know, 10 people or a small population of people in general. Certainly less than 15 connections.
And then just on the very last part of that, the water quality for domestic wells and state smalls. Domestic wells are not regulated by the state. So the state does not, require collection of water quality data. And for state smalls, those are also not regulated by the state. However, some specific locales do keep track of water quality results from state small systems. That would be at the county level.
And I would want to mention also that that is changing because of regulatory efforts in the Central Valley and in the Central Coast region, focusing mostly on nitrate and agriculture, but we are getting an increasing population of data actually from specific domestic wells themselves. But usually, again, that is for nitrate. And our effort has to consider all the chemicals, all 92 chemicals with MCLs. But our first goal is to, and it goes to that person whose email wasn't answered, if there's data out there that we don't have, that's a red alarm for us to get that into the system. And so that when we show a data gap, there's actually a data gap. If there's data we don't have in our system, that's priority number 1. To get this map as right as we can.
You know what? This is John. What dawned on me now that you brought that up again, Scott, it's possible that the attachments to the email that was sent were so large it didn't make it through, or it got bounced over to the junk folder. So maybe if folks out there are interested in sharing data with us for this effort, and you're sending a larger file, send a follow-up email without an attachment to say that I sent an email with a large attachment. Let me know if you got it. I'm not trying to shift blame here, but I'm just thinking out loud that that's a possibility.
Great, so thanks for that. Now we are going to ask a question, another question to the participants today. So we heard in the discussion that some folks were saying that some of the expectations weren't met around risk factors. So we just want to pose that question back to all of the participants that are listening or are joining us today is, what risk factors would you like to see that we missed? So you can raise your hand or *9 on your phone. Looks like we have Kay Loud. Can go ahead and unmute yourself. I'm not sure where Kay. I saw Kay Loud K, it's capital K, then L-O-U-D. The hand went up and then it went down. So I'm not sure, we'll find you again. Now we have a number ending in, it's 650 is the beginning, and then 384. I'm gonna unmute you now.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Catherine Loud, and I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Catherine. Go ahead.
Okay, my question is this. Thinking about the fact that hello, are you still there?
We're still
okay,
here.
Thinking about, okay.
I think we lost her.
California, from one end of California to the other end, we have the Pacific Ocean. And if we have all of these wells with all of these different chemicals, MCLs, that's not coming up to quality, I wonder if anybody has considered doing maybe 2 or 3 desalination plants that we wouldn't have to worry about land subsidence, and we could meet the needs wherever it is for the state of California. I don't know how much it would cost, but I would be interested to find out, comparing to how much money we would be spending to renovate or to rehabilitate these different wells, you know, and also taking in the fact that we have the subsidence of land that is still pretty great here in the state of California.
This is Scott. I can at least talk about that a little bit because we do get involved in permitting and studying desalination plants. And like you point out, they can be a very effective solution for the things you mentioned. They not only provide water, but they prevent or obviate the need to, you can reduce your groundwater extraction if you have this other supply. But it, like everything in California, you know, it's a very local solution, because you then have to, if you want it more regionally, you have to consider vast networks of piping and large quantities of water. So it's certainly, desalination is being looked at in many, as you can imagine, coastal areas to alleviate water shortages, and it can pencil out. It's as you know, probably it's an expensive solution. So it does pencil out in certain areas at this point, but I don't know if it could be considered, you know, for the kind of California-wide scale that you're talking about. But
well, I was just thinking in terms of the fact that we do have aqueducts that go, you know, from the north to the south. So we could have aqueducts that would take the water to wherever it's needed.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And
Well, thanks for the question, Catherine. I'm glad that you are participating today and bringing up those questions, and thanks, Scott, for responding. We're going to go on to the next question. Catherine, I'm going to mute you now so we can go on to the next one. And well, never mind. Someone had their hand up and now it is lowered. So let's just see if we have anyone else that would like to comment on any additional improvements or ideas that we could make for the risk factors. All right, it looks like we have Paul wanting to have another share. There you go, Paul, you should be unmuted.
And I apologize if I'm being a bit redundant here. I didn't want to hog the time, but I do want to jump back to your technical questions. And I have a question on your question. On the first question that was posed, it's, should additional data sources be used to fill data gaps? Could I ask what your intent of that question is? It seems pretty obvious, but I want to make sure I understand.
Sure, I can clarify this quickly. This is Emily. So in the current needs assessment, the domestic well water quality tool, we only input water quality data from well results. So we only use, actual water quality measurements. And this question number 1 here was really getting at, in addition to water quality results, should we also use things such as model results or estimations from other sources as a way to potentially add to the well results or fill data gaps? Does that clarify that?
Yes, and let me kind of speak to all 3 questions in a composite. And I apologize here because you probably thought of all of this and more, but I'll give you my thoughts anyway. So when I look at these as a whole, and I look at that question, I look at the second one, and in particular the third, and we're dealing with these issues within our area and trying to look at ways that we can most effectively assess these same things, because we have to deal with it under the Irrigated Lands Program, and we will under CV salts. So when I take a look at this holistically, the first thing that I would say is, okay, what is the data showing me? Where is the data driving me? I'll look at additional data sources where I need to. As an example, when you look at aggregation, if I see I have an area that has 3 wells and it covers a large area, I'll just look at those 3 wells. If I have a very condensed area that has many wells, then I'll look at it more regionally. So the data will drive me to what type of aggregation. Is interpretive risk areas, that will depend on, again, where the data drives that. What I don't know is at this point in time, because it appears to me at an early stage, that you still need to get into the data a bit to determine if you need data at all, where you need more, where you can aggregate. And it's kind of like the current Sigma plan, and other plans, I guess, actually under the water quality and CV salts, where they're looking at management zones. There may be areas that say, hey, we want a management zone because it makes more sense here, but others may say, well, I'm going to look at it individually. Those are choices you make based on a number of factors. So that's the input I have.
Hey, Paul, this is John. So I'm gonna take a quick stab at your question. I can really appreciate that question. I think, and then I think Scott can dive into fill in the gaps. But in my opinion, you're right. We are still in somewhat of the early stages, but I would say that in general, what we're trying to build out here is an estimation of a given geographic area of what we can expect the groundwater quality to be. Now, let's say it looked like from the poll questions, most people were okay with kind of the granularity, if you will, that the needs assessment map used, which was a 1 square mile area. It's still a pretty large area. A lot can go on within a square mile, as you know, but looking at the way in which the data are scrutinized with the tool that was developed for the needs assessment for that map, you get an idea, for instance, high level of risk associated, let's just pick a chemical nitrate in a given mapped square mile area, a section. And so this map will presumably, let's say at the end of the year, our map looks like that. And we've got an area broken down in the state by map square miles, and each one of them has a given color for relative risk. And let's say we've got a square mile area that's red, considered to be a high risk. I think that map is indicating that, hey, this area, there's a possibility we have a high risk here. Then the folks, the decision makers, I'll call them, will look and utilize that map and go, okay, what's going on here? Is this an area that we want to prioritize and do a deeper dive into what you just described? So I would say the utilization of this map is a tool for the decision makers to use, as opposed to us front loading it and coming up with all these different scenarios of what potential solutions could be up front, if that makes any sense.
That seems to fall in line with the thinking I just described, because what you're basically saying here is a higher level to provide information to get to the detailed level I was describing.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I just wanted to work off that example you had. If you have a lot of wells or just a few, I think our questions that we're asking ourselves is, say you have a few wells over a large area, could you use existing other studies to sort of fill in that data gap? For example, and Emily showed a slide of a USGS arsenic study that attempted to, this is where we think arsenic is and where it isn't. And it wasn't just looking at well data, it was looking at geology and other factors, a modeling exercise. So let's say the USGS study would say, hey, there's a lot of arsenic here, but we just happen to not have wells there. Our method would say either insufficient data, or we would be living or dying by the few wells we had. Should we incorporate other studies to fill in areas where we have a low population of well data? And that it's, that's one thing we're considering. And the problem with using them is that they're chemical specific and region specific and not statewide. But we're just kind of contemplating that idea of using those other studies. The ransom study for nitrate I can see is commonly used as a first cut estimate of what might the nitrate concentration be there, whether or not you have well data to confirm it. And that's also what we're batting around.
And if I could just kind of respond to that in general, because we're talking generalities here, it's a bit difficult. But if you're looking at a particular situation and you're looking at the cause and the effect, well, what is the effect? And then from that, what is the solution? So in the example you're providing, I would say if you had a specific example, going through that process would determine more precisely what you would do. So if this level of assessment is to inform that later decision, then I would say generally what you're doing is probably adequate.
Gotcha.
Okay, well, thank you all. We're going to do a last call here. So last call for rounds of questions, comments from any folks that are participating. Anything that you would like to add? I'm going to ask one more time. I'm going to try this to see if anyone wants to provide any additional information on the risk factors that you commented on earlier, or any other questions, ideas, or comments that you'd like to share about any of the content presented here today. The last call. I'm going to pause for 10 more seconds to give folks a chance and to see if we get any more new forms in. We're also checking our SAFER email. Okay, while we're waiting, just to make sure we're not missing anybody's question or comment, I do want to just re-invite everyone to please, if you have any information you'd like to share, any questions, any ideas, comments, things you forgot about, if you want to learn more about the SAFER program or anything that we shared here today, please always email us at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. If we do not respond to you within 1 to 2 days, feel free to reach back out to us and say, hey, what happened? Where are you? We do our ultimate best to get back to folks within 1 to 2 days. So also, if you want to, we want to always improve our engagement in our meetings. So you can go on here to our evaluation form and let us know how this meeting was for you, what went well, and what we can do to improve it. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Emily to see if she has anything else or if she can wrap us up.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. So I just want to remind people that our goal for this Aquifer Risk Map is to have a final draft available for official comment and public review in October. So I understand that today we don't have a final product for people to review that will be available in October. I just want to say that I really value everybody's input today and really thank you for participating and viewing with this. Yeah, we really value your input. So thank you everybody for participating.
All right, so thanks again for joining us, and we'll be meeting again here at the next workshop coming up in a couple months. Thank you.
Okay, thanks to all the participants.
Thank you.